Hi everybody, thank you for coming to my poetry page and having a little look at my video log of all the stories behind the poems within my collection between hindsight and foresight. I am going to talk to you today about a poem called Define Alone. And I think that it's important to think about these things, especially now when some of us are stuck in our house with our families and loads of other people, but others are stuck in their house by themselves. I live alone at present, and so I know that there are things I have to do to take care of myself. I have to reach out to my friends. I have to talk to my social circle over the computer, over the camera, people from work, things like that. So I look after myself. Part of the reason I know how to look after myself, and part of the reason I think that being alone during this time period is not affecting me as horribly as it possibly might have, is because of the first period of time that I ended up spending quite a lot of time by myself. Somewhere around 9 years ago, I had a major change in my life. My marriage was breaking up, and I had moved to a new apartment in a new town just after I turned 30, just after I finished my qualification to become a teacher. And this poem, Define Alone, was written during the early autumn when I was starting at my NQT job. And it was a particularly difficult job, and it was a particularly difficult time because I very badly needed the job in order to kind of keep myself self-sustaining. But, you know, I was also very much a wreck. I had lost something that really mattered to me. And I also realized in this very difficult time that at 30 years old, in a country that I was not born in a town that I barely knew, I was actually living alone for the first time in my entire life. Because of the way life goes in America, I was living with my family all the way up, all through school until I moved to university. When I went to university, American university almost always has roommates. So I had been living in dorms with another person who, and then when I left university, I came straight over to England to do a graduate course and to live with my husband. And so my entire life, I had never actually lived on my own, under my own terms, making all my own decisions, not having to check with anybody about what was okay, what wasn't okay. And it did cause a lot of change in me as a person. I was reconstructing myself from the ground up. I had friends that I was still seeing. I was on friendly terms with my ex, but the whole journey was really quite challenging because I had never been just me. I had always been myself under the influence of outside feedback. I would subtly change how I behaved and how I acted and how I interacted depending on who I was with. And so this period of time when I was living alone on the Kent coast was the first time where I got to decide who I was without anyone else's input, without anyone else's judgment, approval, or disapproval. And it, looking back on it, while it was an incredibly emotionally challenging time, it was also very good for me. I know who I am now. I know what I want and what I don't want as part of my life. But this was the beginning of that stage. And so the beginning of that exploration and that reflection. Define Alone was written because I was still new to the town and I had explored some of the town and discovered a restaurant called Age & Sons. And it was tucked away in a little courtyard, a little red brick courtyard in the middle of town, about 10 minutes walk from my place. And it looked really fantastic. It had a daily menu, which suggested that, obviously little things would change every single day. And Age & Sons was run by a Michelin-starred chef, Toby Lee, and I was really fascinated by the stuff that I'd seen on the menu, and it looked really good. And I had a friend who was coming to visit for a weekend, so I wanted to know if the restaurant was any good, if we could use that restaurant to go out for dinner on the weekend that my friend was down. So I decided to go out. I never go out. I almost never went out when I was with someone. So now to like go out for the evening to a fancy restaurant to just spoil myself, to enjoy a good, nice dinner, table service out, was really unusual. So I got dressed up. I felt like treating myself. I got into my favorite three-piece suit, and I went did the nice walk in the evening down to town to this restaurant. Now, because I was dressed up in three-piece suit and it was still early, and I had my notebook with me, because that was when I started the habit of bringing my notebook out with me to write poetry if it struck me. They must have thought that I was possibly somebody important, maybe a mystery shopper or some kind of reviewer, because, I looked like somebody who was official. While I was waiting for my food, I started to write down this poem. Now, the poem, Define Alone, is very, very emblematic of the style of poetry I started to develop during this time, about 9 years ago, the second half of the time that I was writing. Very visual, very running through and reflecting on why certain images or snapshots that I see catch my attention, how they reflect how I'm feeling, how those different things as I walked from my place down into town would catch my attention. So if you read the poem, you'll see each verse kind of moves through my walk from my place down into the restaurant. And those images that I explored reflected my own introspection about being alone. A petrol station that looked abandoned, the cracked pavement, looking out the window, staring across that dining table where when they realize that nobody else is joining you, you possibly don't need that other set of cutlery and the wine glass or, the other setting on the table. And, I don't know whether they took it away so that I didn't feel like I was by myself, but taking it away really kind of emphasized that I was by myself. I was alone. And when I started writing the poem, I was really kind of sad about that. And I didn't know how to feel about going out to a fancy dinner dressed up by myself in the middle of the night. I mean, there was no one else in the restaurant. It was really early. And it was outstanding table service. It was one of the best restaurants I've ever been to in my life. And it felt really personal and it felt really nice. And the poem didn't end up where I thought it was going to be. When I started writing the poem and I started going through the images in my mind of taking that walk, I thought it was going to be a poem about how lonely I felt, how it hurt to be so alone in that experience. But by the end of the poem, as I ran through it, maybe it was because the restaurant service was good, because I got wonderful interaction with the waitress or whatever the reason. By the time I got to the end of the poem and it felt finished and I looked over the whole journey of it, it was odd. I felt good. I felt okay for the first time since I'd moved, and for the first time since I'd started school and I was dealing with being by myself and knocking around the house by myself. Honestly, I felt great. And it hit me, and it hits me with the realization in the poem that alone is not the same thing as lonely. And so even though all of us are in our separate houses or separate jobs or whatever, one thing that I know for absolutely sure is that whether you're in a household full of 8 people, making sure everybody's keeping safe and keeping well, or whether you're in a household by yourself, letting the dishes and the laundry pile up because nobody's going to be at the house, we're not alone in any of this. All we have to do is reach out, or all we have to do is realize that being alone doesn't mean you have to feel lonely, because we're not alone, and we're not lonely as long as we recognize that and we reach out to the people that matter to us and we look after each other. And so that was what the poem Define Alone taught me, even as I wrote it. the poem didn't end up where I thought it was going to end up, and it taught me that I was okay, that I was going to be okay. And it was the first time I'd felt that in a long time. It was the first time I'd felt that since this massive change in my life. So I am happy to share it with you, and I hope that as you read the poem, you join me at that dinner table, you join me in that realization that we're together and that we can go out to dinner anytime we want. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Take care of each other, and I'll see you at dinner.